Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L'Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching. Today we are looking at self-care, what it is, and how, sometimes it can be triggering. It can be a hot topic. I've noticed on YouTube and other places, we will be looking at it in coaching, how it shows up, how we approach self-care in coaching, and we'll be looking at some strategies for self-care. So Eryn, what comes up for you when you hear this term self-care? And have you seen anything in the media or on social media about self-care recently?
Lately, I've seen with clients, just even the topic of self-care is something that might shut them down or is not of interest or feels unattainable. And I think that part of that is the way that it is framed in terms of self-care. How can one, provide care to oneself when there's so many other things going on? And how can it be this standalone thing? And I think those are two really important questions. And so I like to think about it as care. Just get rid of the self and think about care. How do you care for yourself? And how does that get intertwined into your day-to-day activities instead of this kind of standalone thing with self-care? I don't even like to frame it too often as self-care anymore based off of feedback that I've received and also certain things I've read and then client information as well. And so I think we could think about it a little bit more holistically in terms of just the word care. How does care show up for us from others? How does it show up for us for ourselves? How does it show up in the context of systems around us and all those sorts of things? And I think that's why it's so hard for people to buy into this concept, because it's like, yes, self-care, but what about care everywhere else, right? And what about the care that I also need to provide to others and those sorts of things? So those are some of the things that have been coming up in conversations that I've had lately around self-care. And I don't know if the topic, if the phrase is that triggering or difficult for people, just generally, or if it's something that's just showing up here. L'Shawn, what about you? Have you noticed any feedback on self-care?
Well, I find that there's a lot of talk and a lot of, like if you look at, for example, some like YouTube channels or where there's coaches or there's healers who are talking to their audience, they almost always say, take care of yourself, or they let their audience know that they're wonderful, beautiful, amazing. And I think there's been kind of a backlash to that about it kind of turning into you bypassing your problems or not dealing with your problems and instead doing things that bring you pleasure in lieu of things that are like really important, like your health and that kind of thing. And it's really interesting what you said about it being the self in self-care and just to get rid of that self, because I think that, and the reason why it might be triggering is because people might associate that with the word selfish. And I think that also is what can be triggering, I would assume, like in grief or even in caregiving. If you bring that up in caregiving, like with caregivers, if you say, you need to make sure that you take care of yourself, or that what are you doing about your self-care? People might feel guilty. Like you said, there's so many other things that I need to do. There's so many other people that are important in this situation. So if I turn the lens on myself, then am I neglecting others by doing that? And what I find is it's like the oxygen metaphor, or analogy, I should say. It's not really a metaphor. When you're on the plane and the oxygen mask drops. You have like a matter of seconds before lack of oxygen is going to affect your ability to think, your ability to do much of anything. So they tell you put the oxygen mask on first before you assist a child or someone who you are taking care of. And I think that is where I would say self-care comes in, because I I think it is a good idea to maybe take away that prefix self, take that out and just say care, and then talk about the different areas of care, care of others, care of self, care of family, whatever, and then just take that self out of the actual word because it kind of sets it apart from care. However, I would say there is probably a reason that has come about, that we have self-care instead of care. And I would like to explore that more in terms of that being a indication that we take for granted our mental and physical health. If everything's going well and it just kind of happens as by chance, or we're not really intentionally doing it. And I find that unless we're dealing with chronic illness or, lots of pain, unless something happens where it's called to our attention, either through pain, emotional or physical, we really, very few of us, there are some of us that are, and more these days, as we're starting to raise awareness to the fact that it's really, really important to be intentional about your health, both mental and physical. And I think that self-care came about because there was a time, and there still is in some circles, where our needs and what our health is kind of put on the back burner, especially with women, when we have a family, when we have people to take care of, when other people come in, even if you don't have a family. I see that with my own children. My daughter, she's got friends, and she often puts her friends before herself. So I think there is a reason that we do have self-care, and I'd like to explore that a little bit more as to why it came about, like self-care. And now there's a backlash, which is really interesting to me as well. Eryn, any thoughts on that? I know that was a really long
No,
soliloquy there, but
I liked what you said, and then the piece about pleasure being different than self-care. And I think maybe that's also where people sometimes get confused, is self-care isn't always pleasurable, right? Like, especially if you're working toward a fitness goal or something, when that starts out, that might be a little bit challenging, a little bit hard, those sorts of things. And yet that's a form of self-care. So sometimes people might feel let down by the phrase, like, well, I started to try self-care by this, but it didn't feel like it. And it's like, well, there are different ways that care can show up in one's life that may feel differently. It doesn't always have to feel pleasurable. And yet people don't always have to deny themselves that pleasure either. There's always that nuance to kind of finding what's going to work for you. And I think that's what makes this phrase so hard too, is because there's so many different things going on with us as individuals within the self, right? We have our senses, we have our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual health, all of those sorts of things. And then on top of that, there's more and more findings of moving beyond the five senses to eight senses. And one of those being interoperceptive, how we are in tune with what's going on with us in our bodies internally, what's going on with our heart, what's going on with our lungs, that sort of thing. So paying attention to that is a form of self-care, but then doing external things is a form of self-care. So there's so many ways that someone can employ this phrase for themselves that probably can feel overwhelming, not knowing where to start, or people can shut down when they feel like they chose maybe strategies that don't work for them. Or it might feel like, I tried this once and it didn't work, so I don't want to try this again. Or I already know what I'm doing for self-care, and this only addresses specific needs of mine, but leaves out other needs of mine. And I think that is what gets this concept so tangled up and so confusing and so hard for ourselves to unravel what's going to work well in our day-to-day lives, and recognize that that's going to shift over time. And as our interests change, our connections with individuals change, and as we age. So yeah, there is a lot to untangle here. So I'm gonna ask you a personal question about your own
Mhm.
self-care, LaShawn. Do you have an example of a time when you started utilizing self-care intentionally and you didn't like it, it didn't work for you, it made you frustrated, and you stopped self-care altogether?
I struggled with just feelings of sadness, low self-worth, low self-esteem. When I started really looking at self-care, it was more having to do with building my self-esteem and building my sense of love. And I knew that, or being loved, and I knew that that needed to come from within. And so a lot of what I did in terms of self-care was intentionally looking at how I was, talking to myself, what thoughts were producing those feelings of just really just deep sadness and feelings of loneliness, and really just looking at what my self-talk was that was leading to what were the beliefs behind these feelings that were just getting overwhelming. And so I would say that no, I haven't started a self-care regimen where I felt like, no, this isn't working for me, because largely my self-care has been just dealing with strengthening my mind and creating a place, a space in my mind where I feel safe and I feel loved, because I know that internally, if I feel safe and I feel loved, then nothing externally is going to change that. However, I have kind of been thinking about expanding, and this is really weird because it's top down. Um, because if you look at our needs, there are several models of need and different theories on need. But one thing that I came across in my teaching and my research was Maslow's hierarchy of need. When I look at that pyramid, it starts out with the larger side of the bottom of the pyramid with physiological needs, then safety needs, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. So that top of the pyramid is self-actualization. So the desire to become the most that one can be. So I started out in the esteem part, respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, that kind of thing. Love and belonging was another thing. And now I find myself looking at, okay, so what about those other needs that I maybe take for granted, like eating right, taking care of my physiological needs. And right now, I'm finding that my journey has taken me to, are you taking care of your health? Are you eating right? And I think it has to do with my age as well. Um, but, really looking around and really understanding my mortality, having dealt with several deaths in the family, seeing my mother's health decline, and then really start looking at what am I doing to make sure that I have good quality of life when I get older. So now my self-care routine is changing. My lens is moving from the mental space to the physical space, like what am I putting in my body? And then I'm starting to find the connections to what I eat and my activity levels and my mood. So that's been really interesting. So to answer your question, Eryn, I haven't come across a self-care routine that hasn't worked for me. But I will say that it wasn't until I really intentionally looked at what was going on mentally, what was going on that was causing these low moods, just long bouts of depression, and really just feeling lonely and not knowing what to do and looking outside of myself for the answers. Until I took an intentional approach to that, nothing really changed. It wasn't until I really started to make it a daily routine and a daily habit that things started to really shift and change, and I started to transform the way that I looked at life. How about you, Eryn?
And it
Any
sounds,
any any thoughts?
well, just one thing I noticed, it sounds like that intentionality is connected to this longer term thinking for you, like your health in the long term.
Yeah.
And so there's a level of motivation that's directly tied to that intentionality that's working for you. And that seemed to have shifted, as you got older in some ways. And I do think of like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and think about how it has also shifted for me over the years. And then, for college and high school students, how things might often look a little bit more in the present. And so I love that you bring that up because I think it's a good framework to think about when we think about self-care and how we can apply that intentionally. I think for me, I have struggled because I've always liked being active, so running, those sorts of things. And so I've always attached my way that I relate to those to this is just a strategy I like to do, something I like to do for fun. And maybe on the periphery say, and this is something that, provides care for me. But as I have gotten older, like you said, I have noticed a shift in recognizing that this isn't only something that I enjoy to do that feeds my soul, feeds my body and my movement needs, but it's also something that is going to, work for me as a health strategy in the longer term. And that has been directly applied to my my car accident recently, where I'm still, doing physical therapy, still in the brace, still grappling with the brokenness of my wrist, those sorts of things. And I think having gone through that at this stage of my life and being so dedicated to the physical therapy versus maybe 10 years ago, where I would have just thought it would just heal on its own and I wouldn't have to have that level of care from myself to myself, that's been a significant shift, I think. And so even self-care as a day-to-day strategy, yes, and something that I think about and try to employ, but also just directly as a result of this accident, how it has shown up more robustly than it probably would have 10 years ago. So I love this idea is like as we keep moving through life, we also, may tie our intentionality to the longevity piece of self-care. And for me, the other piece to this is I do like to have more of an immediate motivator. So while, longer term might be helpful for me, I also do like to know that, hey, if I go on this run, I'm going to feel a certain way. Or if I eat this salad, I'm going to feel a certain way and look a certain way and those sorts of things. And so those kind of more immediate um, feedback loops are really invaluable to me as well. So I kind of think about it too in that framework of I think we do need a consistent level of care, self-care, or care to ourselves, or however we want to frame that provides that immediate feedback loop or that input in some way that's helpful for us. And then also looking at the larger circle all around that of the longer term needs of ourselves and how care can really be so invaluable throughout our lifetimes. And in particular, when I hear this a lot from moms with young kids, and they might be juggling a lot of different aspects of their lives and trying to really find where care might fit in. I think it might be worth exploring some small, you know, tiny behavior shifts or changes that could work for an individual. So I always think of starting at the smallest level and then like bringing that back to the microscopic level. So let's say, I get up to breastfeed at 5 a.m. and then I go to work during the day and then I come home back to, breastfeeding, back to playing with my kids, cooking, to sleep, those sorts of things. Where does the care fit in? And so maybe it's taking 5 extra minutes at lunch to do a meditation or to just sit in silence or to look at something that's funny, a joke, or text a friend that's something that's funny, something that can reawaken you to who you are and what you desire and those sorts of things. That's just one example here when I think of a basic strategy for self-care. L'Shawn, do you have ideas for our listeners about how to embody and how to use self-care strategies?
I think it comes down to really understanding And I think we take for granted that, yeah, we know what care is, right? But I think it's really important to remember what care is. So, right, it's the main maintenance of health and wellness. I think we need to think about, okay, so what does that look like? Just like you were saying with the whole routine and making sure that you have that in your daily routine. For me, I think, again, it goes back to just being intentional and understanding what daily activities will help you maintain that wellness. People have the gym in their daily routine. They go to the gym in the morning, or they run like you run, or they do something with physical activity. So you want to make sure you're maintaining your physical well-being by eating well, making sure that you intentionally include fruits and vegetables in what you eat, everything you eat. If you have a snack, you might want to make sure that that's a fruit or a vegetable, or it's a protein. So you know that you're maintaining your physical well-being. And then for your mental well-being, you want to make sure that you are maintaining your stress levels. One of the things that we learn in positive intelligence is, and in any, healing modality, we know that stress isn't something that you can rationalize or talk yourself out of. So it's really important that you are practicing certain activities or behaviors that will manage your stress, because stress is just part of life. And it can be a good thing, actually, especially if you manage it. One way of managing it is just to make sure that you're taking the time out to connect with yourself, to maybe focusing on your breath, or you're doing things that can get you back into your body, especially if you have a job that is particularly intellectual, or you're using your mind a lot, but you're not really attuned with your body. So I just think that it's really about intentionally, consistently having top of mind those things that are going to maintain wellness. And that extends to being a parent. You want to make sure that your child has built in their day healthy eating, healthy activities and habits, and not just with their physical well-being, but their mental well-being. So you want to make sure that you're teaching them regulation, self-regulation, that kind of thing, and giving them the tools that they need, so that when they do come across something that's frustrating or something that's challenging, they have tools that are going to help them manage that on their own. So those are some things that come to mind when I think about strategies, is you want to just be mindful of the activities and the best practices for maintaining your wellness, your well-being. Do you have anything to add to that, Eryn?
I think this is where coaching is so invaluable and so helpful for this concept, because a client can come in and coach specifically around self-care. And we've talked about some strategies, but every single person is going to utilize and engage with strategies a little bit differently. So in coaching, we might do a part of our appointment where we're just brainstorming back and forth topics that relate to self-care, and finding something that might fit specifically for the individual, that fits into their schedule and their motivation to make a change. Because that's huge. It's hard if one's not motivated to make a change, and one's not even considering a change, then we're likely working within motivation for a while on that specific topic rather than moving into self-care. But if one's recognizing they want to employ self-care, just even maybe at the smallest level, there's a hint of motivation that this could work for the individual. So I think that's important too. And then also not getting overwhelmed in the shifts, because this can bring up a lot of other bigger things that might be going on in one's life that are outside of oneself, or in relationships, or with their jobs and those sorts of things. And that could then be a whole nother topic of how do employ self-care when you're starting to recognize certain things aren't going very well. And it's nice if you already have some of these practices established, so that you can build on them in those moments where you might need to heighten your care for yourself. And I have a specific personal example about this where I just crashed and burned, taking on way too much after the birth of my third child. And looking back, I had let go of all of my coping strategies and care strategies for myself that if I would have stuck with those, would have made this situation a little bit easier for myself, I think. But on the other end of that, it's like there were so many exterior things going on that, how did those self-care strategies that I had established in the past show up? Why were they not showing up because of what's going on outside of myself, et cetera? And that's really challenging. And I think that's where clients come to me and say, yeah, like, I know I want to do this and make a small shift in the way that I care for myself, but it just seems so unattainable given my work hours, given all these responsibilities, given all these things. And I know I already mentioned that there are like small shifts to maybe try in those situations, but there's something bigger going on there as well. And I think that's why the self-care concept sometimes comes up as a challenging and triggering concept, because it's like, well, let's take a look now at what's really going on with your whole life and how that fits in with your needs and wants. So it gets a little tricky, this concept. And, I think one thing that I think about when I think about just making any change in one's life, whether that's related to care or whether that's related just, to your day-to-day specifically, is the word that you use, L'Shawn, intentionality, and then also motivation. I think when we couple those two together, there's something that can really be looked at for an individual to help them recognize their wants and needs in a way to move forward in a hopeful way, in a way that works for them.
Yeah, definitely. I see that. And something that came up for me when you were talking, and I know you said, and I'm not sure if I interrupted you. So I just want to check in to see if there was more you wanted to say before I did add.
No, please keep going.
Okay. So the intentionality and the motivation, and I wanted to add to that perspective, because I think that's where coaching comes in. As you said, it can be overwhelming when a lot of things are happening. You use your own personal example with your third child and how you started to take on things and get overwhelmed by that. And I think that one of the things that coaching does, and a role that coaching can play around self-care or around care in general, is that perspective, and that kind of zooming out and looking at the big picture. And also you have a partner in the process of the problem solving process, or the process of planning, how you can be more intentional. If something is kind of not going the way you want it to, or there's something you want to improve in your life, and you have certain tools that have worked up to a point, you want to add to that, to your toolkit or your toolbox. Coaching can do that. It can help you expand that and add to what you're already doing that's working, and maybe even enhance or use different parts of a tool. Maybe you were using it in a certain way, but there was another way that you could do it in this particular situation, a different way that it could be used. The strategies that that you may have used in the past might be something that you want to bring back for this particular situation. And one of the things that coaching does is it gives you that perspective. It's a creation of, the solution. And so you're working with a partner, you have a structure, and there's somebody facilitating the process. So you have that objective view as well that helps to add more layers or see more than maybe that might be in your blind spot. So that's one thing that I would like to add to what you had said about intentionality, motivation, and I think perspective. And then also, and this goes in with coaching as well, as accountability. So really having a support, someone or a system that helps you stay consistent and follow through. it's not a judgmental thing. It's not like, oh, you're bad. It's not punitive or anything, but it is something that I think anytime you're implementing a new habit or a new strategy, or you're dealing with a new situation and you're kind of trying to navigate that, it's great to have someone or a system that will help you stay accountable to your goals and to what you want to accomplish, to remain intentional. And also it helps with motivation. Eryn, did you have anything to add to that?
I just summarized what you've said and what we've covered so far regarding care for the self or self-care. And like you said, it's intentionality, motivation, perspective, accountability, structure, community support, or, just human support, and then strategies as well. So self-care is all of those things. And that's also both hopeful and challenging to think about, because it's like, oh wow, this is a lot. But also it's also a framework that you can work from that can make, providing care to yourself that much more accessible. So I like that we've circled in on kind of a framework or a model for self-care.
Yeah, that I'm glad that you synthesized that and reiterated those points that we were making. I think that will be really helpful for the listeners to have that model of self-care. And there's one thing that I also wanted to add about self-care, and it goes back to the example that I talked about at the beginning with the putting the oxygen mask on your face first. One of the things that I want to point out is that if you're in a caregiving role, either a parent or you're taking care of an elderly parent or you're taking care of someone else, self-care is a way of ensuring that you can help other people. And I think it starts with the self, because if we get sick and there are people depending on you, or you don't have a clear mind and you're making decisions that are maybe not as good for you or for other people because you're coming from a place of fear. I think that it's really important to remember that we are not islands, that we have networks, that there are people and pets that depend on us, that we have that interdependence. So it's not just affecting the individual when we're looking at self-care. It's affecting the people in your life when you deal with self-care. So I want to bring that back in, that when we focus on ourselves and we focus on how we take care of ourselves, and we are attuned to what's going on with meeting our own needs, we then are better able to meet the needs of others, like for our children who maybe are learning to meet their own needs, or for an elderly parent, in a healthier way than if we just do it out of reaction, or we are doing it from a place of fear. So that's another thing that I wanted to say that's really important with care and self-care.
I really appreciate that point, and I think it really is in alignment with compassion for ourselves and for others as we go through this process of our own development. And I like to think about that as a human. That's our role, is our human development over the course of a lifetime. So this is just one mechanism to keep your own development in mind about, who you really want to be in the world, and, how you want to live your life, and those kind of bigger philosophical questions as well. So self-care is also a compassionate thing. And I like, L'Shawn, that you brought up the fear concept that might come up as well. So I don't know. I think, are we circling in on a coaching nugget of wisdom?
We are perfect, perfect timing.
Do you want to go first?
Well, I would say that I'm just gonna, because this has been kind of the thing that I've been harping on, I guess, or a thing that comes up for me a lot is intentionality. And I would put out there that things, if we want to have a high quality life, or if we want to optimize our life experience, intentionality is key. It's so important to be aware of what's going on and also really tune into ways that you can build in the habit of care, whether it's for yourself or for others. Just really understand what that means to you and how that shows up and how you can intentionally build in best practices in your day. How about you, Eryn?
I think I would add a piece of just believing in yourself and your capacity to do hard things, to make changes, those sorts of things. So, really embodying that belief in yourself and that investment in yourself. And maybe also, working with a friend or a partner as an accountability partner, or simply as someone just to talk to about your goals for yourself and your changes around your self-care practice, or simply your maintenance with your self-care practice.
Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm L'Shawn with Mayshell Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.